Ladies and gentlemen, Uganda has also, over the last 1 year, been experiencing rising water levels of major water bodies and intensive rainfall since September 2019. These are having very big flooding in several parts of the country due to prolonged and impacts on property, infrastructure, and people's lives. This is due to increased settlements and developments in floodplains, poor agricultural practices, and deforestation. These have made the soils loose and the steep slopes bare and allowed water to move very fast to valleys immediately after rains. The above factors have all combined to worsen the flooding problem. Government is currently implementing measures to manage the perennial occurrence of floods in and around the country. These include, among others, protection of water catchments and the general environment, regular maintenance of water bodies and the rivers so that they perform their water storage and the conveyance function, construction of water reservoirs, demarcation and the protection of lake shores, river banks, and the wetlands to limit encroachment by settlements, agricultural activities, and other development, and the strengthening of enforcement of the water and environmental laws at all levels. Ladies and gentlemen, another big problem is the plastics we see around. This has become the most dominant waste in the country, both on land and in our water bodies. More than 600 tons of plastic is disposed of each day. The country has a large number of inland water bodies which are being suffocated by plastic litter. This is in addition to the pollution caused on land, in the drainage systems, in towns, dump sites, and the parks. The country thus recognizes the threat and the dangers posed by waste, and particular plastic litter and associated pollution, and has put in place a number of measures to address the problem as follows. We enacted the 2019 environmental law, which bans carrier bags that are under 30 microns. Government has imposed producer extended responsibility as part of polluter pays principle. This will ensure that producers of materials with potential to pollute will have the duty to follow the management of their product through its life cycle. The law has brought on board a cross-section of other actors to implement the provision of the law on plastic pollution. Government has also imposed mandatory condition to all plastic manufacturers to establish recycling plants and ensure that they follow their plastic material and bring it back for recycling. This is a precondition for licensing any plastic manufacturing enterprise. Specific emphasis has been put on nationwide, multi-sectoral, multimedia, critical environmental literacy and campaigns to empower citizens to follow the right waste management hierarchy. I want to thank the education sector, which has taken the lead in slapping a total ban on plastic carrier bags in all our education institutions. Awareness creation in schools is being done through the different environment education initiatives. The plastic recycling sector is being improved in order to reduce the amount of plastic waste entering the environment. I wish therefore to call upon all Ugandans to support all efforts to address the problem of plastic pollution. Ladies and gentlemen, water and environment resources don't recognize administrative boundaries. These resources are shared with other countries by various local governments and by various people. Thus, their rational and equitable development and management is key to growth of the country. The varying uses of water are interlinked and require sustainable exploitation and management to ensure that there is adequate water of the right quality and quantity for both production and domestic use, even during the dry seasons. Thus, considering that water and environment resources are at the core of sustainable development and are critical for socio-economic development, healthy ecosystems, and for human survival, these resources will be critical in the achievement of the NDP 3 goal and targets. I am therefore happy to note that the theme of the 4th Uganda Water Environment Week is water environment security for socio-economic transformation of Uganda. I also know that this event is celebrated under 4 sub-themes, namely A, valuing water and environment resources for socio-economic transformation of Uganda; B, water and environment in a creative economy; C, managing water and environment shocks; and D, water and environment security for smart urban growth. This is a befitting theme and a sub-theme for the 4th Uganda Water and Environment Week, more so at a time when the country is facing challenges caused by COVID-19, rising water levels, flooding, and job loss. I therefore request all the participants of the 4th Uganda Water and Environment Week to critically discuss how water and environment security can be ensured to enable the country address the current challenges and contribute to socio-economic transformation through inclusive growth, employment, wealth creation in line with the NDP 3 goal. I therefore have no doubt that the outcome of this Uganda Water and Environment Week will make significant contributions to enabling Uganda achieve the National Development Plan 3 goals and targets. I wish to recognize the organizations and development partners that have continued to support the Ministry of Water and Environment to deliver water and environment resources to the people of Uganda. On behalf of the government of Uganda, I wish to thank you for this support and request you to continue providing such support so that this critical sector of government can perform its key functions of sustainable development and the management of water and environment resources for the benefits of Ugandans. I wish all of you very fruitful deliberations during this week. I wish to formally declare the 4th Uganda Water and Environment Week formally open. For God and my country.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Prime Minister deserves a bigger hand clap. We are now going to move into the keynote speech, and we have a professor all the way from Colorado, and he is ready. Allow me now introduce Professor Ken Strzeżpek. Professor Ken is a leading researcher and practitioner at the nexus of engineering, environmental, and economic systems related to civil infrastructure, with a focus on water, food, and energy systems and climate change adaptation. He investigates the role of climate change and infrastructure development on economic growth and poverty reduction. Strzeżpek is a research scientist at the MIT Joint Program on the Science and Policy of Global Change. He has spent 40 years as a researcher and practitioner. He is joining us through Zoom. And Professor, you're most welcome. And you're going to give us a keynote address in 25 minutes, or if you like, under 25, on water and environment security for socio-economic transformation of Uganda. Professor, you're most welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are you able to hear me in Kampala?
Very clearly, Professor.
Yes, if the host could open my screen sharing, I will share my slides with you. It is with great pleasure that I join you today, very humbly that I can be with you, and I want to thank you for this invitation. And as we prepare our slides, I would like to thank all of the previous speakers, and as I open to acknowledge the Prime Minister and his representatives who are here today, the Minister of Water, and all of the other distinguished speakers. And I'm extremely honored that we would have such wonderful young Ugandans with us today. As we know, the future of Uganda is in its youth, and to hear such wonderful poetry from them about the topic today is outstanding. So if the host could release so I can share my screen. They're not allowing participant screen sharing. So
you need to get host right.
yes.
Professor, that preparation is being made.
Okay, good. So while that's beginning, I will start a little bit, and then you can see that this morning my heart is with you in Uganda while I am here in Colorado, 10,000 kilometers away. But I want to tell you that I tried to make a part of Uganda with me this morning. Ah, wonderful. We can now share. And okay, so can you see our opening slide?
Yes, we can see.
Okay, so as I said, because I couldn't be with you, I am here partially in that I'm drinking my coffee here at 5 in the morning, and that coffee comes all the way from Mount Elgon. So every morning I'm able to have part of you as I prepare this work. And also I made my own Rolex for breakfast this morning. So as much as I can with you, I'm trying to be there today. So let's see if we can share, because Dr. Kalis said there would be lunch, but he said it was too hard to ship by DHL to me. So we will be a part of you today. What I wanted to talk today about was to link two things. What do we know about economics and water and environment? And then also what's going on with the theme of this conference and workshop, and can we bring some information directly to it to hopefully start it off in the right direction and bring up some questions and issues that have been going on in Uganda. So the first thing here, so we want to address that the goal of NDP3 is industrialization. We see that, successful industrialization of the economy. So this is really important because, as we'll see a little bit later, that is generally the path to increase incomes and move labor from low-paid agriculture to better industrial development. However, there is a threat when we work with industrialization and over the past. And there is a famous Harvard economist called Kuznets, and he developed a curve which has been adopted by environmental economists and development economists that show that there has been traditionally this path as you move through economic development, which is basically income per capita. So if we assume that dashed line on the left-hand side is where Uganda is now, and NDP3 wants to get us to the dashed line on the right, historically, all the Western countries and many of those have gone on this path that the more you develop, the more you degrade your environment through pollution, destroying resources like wetlands and forests, which we've heard quite a bit about. And my distinguished colleague from UNDP, we're going to address some of those issues of forestry as well today, not just water as we move forward. So as we have this threat, what I want to come is to bring a warning. What is the warning that we have is, let's go look at another country, which is Vietnam. And what's the cautionary tale here is if we look on this plot at the bottom, we see that it rapidly grew and passed the middle income threshold, which we know is a goal of the government of Uganda. But as it went along, it had good resources. But if we look again, what we see is from a recent study that we were just involved with, is that this growth is 5% less than it could have been had they not trashed the environment or polluted. So while we think this path that we just showed in that curve is something that would be beneficial for the government, as we've looked at this, here is these results. We did an analysis like we did in Uganda, and untreated water on health is leading to a 3.5% decrease in GDP alone, and water stress from not taking into account good water resource management is another 1.2. So almost all of this 6% impact on GDP loss was due to water management and pollution. And so how can we go forward? Is it possible to grow? Well, there is a theory that's out there that we're at a crisis. And so there's a famous quote by President John F. Kennedy, who quoted the Chinese symbol of crisis, which says when you're at a crisis, you come and you bring danger and there's opportunity at that point. And what has happened is back then when Kennedy was speaking, America's knowledge of Chinese culture, I think, was not as good as it is now. And what they've said is that opportunity is a bad translation of the second character. It's more a turning point. And so one could view a turning point as an opportunity as well. So we're facing a crisis. Uganda wants to grow. The past, every other country in the world has seen this growth, but at the cost of the environment. Is it possible that there's a new way forward? And what that is this red line. Can Uganda go from pre-industrial to post-industrial, to middle income, without seeing this rapid degradation of the environment? And what I argue is that it can. And so development and environmental economists call this activity tunneling through the Kuznets curve. And can we tunnel through? Or we have heard so much about COVID, one of the things we keep hearing is flattening the curve. Can we do something to keep us from having this peak? And I argue we can. And that's what we want to talk about today, as we go through the 4 themes that you've talked about. The first one is, as we look at this, where is water and environment? This is a list of projects from NDP 2. Nowhere in these priority projects is anything related to water and environment. But as was mentioned in the previous speech, we were fortunate with industrial economics to be part of the activity by the former minister who asked, what is the impact of investment in water environment on Uganda's growth? And the good news is that, like we found in Vietnam, if we invest in Uganda 2040 to enhance water supply, wetlands, forests, and catchment management, we can increase GDP by 2040 by 9%. How is this possible? This 9% is broken up into these different parts. By water and sanitation alone, that brings us about 3%. Providing water for livestock, what we call water for production, that brings another 10%. But what's important is, as to go along with my colleague from UNDP, forest protection brings you on the order of 25% of that benefit. And then flood risk mitigation through wetlands and others brings an important part. So what we're able to see is, in Uganda, these are numbers for Uganda, if we invest and take another step forward and do not, or if we tunnel through or bend the curve, people usually think that's going to come as a cost. They think protecting the environment, sustainability will slow down growth, and we're showing it's just the opposite, that it'll increase growth. And so how can Uganda do things differently? Uganda can chart a different path. Our studies have shown that this stewardship will help it, but what we need to do is integrate water and environmental investment plans within a framework and tools for sustainable growth. So it's requiring all the ministries to work together and to come together at cabinet to see that as we allocate budgets for investment and as there are investments in other sectors, that water and environment be part of that investment to protect the environment as we grow. We don't have to do it in spite of it. The next part that we've talked about is the theme today is the creative economy. And how does that fit with that? Well, one of the things that, as you look at the definition, is using creativity, using high tech, and that is something really important in water infrastructure. Making smart cities, making smart systems that will use the advantage of technology. And an example of that would be flood forecasting. What can we do by using satellite data, weather forecasts, etc.? And does that help in our growth? Well, what we found is, here's just one study of this, that a study was done for Europe that if we use flood awareness systems, that the benefits are 400 to 1 for investments in smart technologies for flood investment, for flood protection, over pouring concrete or building other things. Now, this is really high. I bet it's even lower, but even if it was 100 to 1, that would be a fantastic system. So as we study in some of the other work we've done in smart infrastructure, we need to come not only with just hardware or hard structures, but also management, adaptation, and other exciting technology. So we can bring the creative economy into a partnership with the future development of water and environmental protection. Those together will be very economically beneficial. As we move to our next theme here, water managing shocks. Now, this is something that we want to take a lot of time about, because we need to understand a little bit why shocks are so detrimental to economies. And so one of the things here is we usually use GDP as a measure of the economy, and that's true. And on the right-hand side here is a little schematic which shows how is GDP produced. GDP is produced through what we call capital. And there's a new approach out there amongst economists called inclusive wealth, that a country's wealth is its capital, and there are 3 factors to its capital. the natural capital, which we heard about before, the beautiful Pearl of Africa, the rainfall, the sunshine, the land that's there in Uganda. How can we use it? Then there is the produced capital, the buildings, the roads, the reservoirs, the hydro plants that we've developed. And then there is the so important human capital, the education that goes into the expertise that we see. Now, with everyone in the room, the human capital that's being developed in schools and coming forward. Those come into the economy, and just to be a little bit nerdy to wake everybody up this afternoon, here's an equation. A very simple thing of the economy is the output of an economy is a function of L, which is labor, and K, which is capital. So the amount of capital you have here will affect your output. And so what we have to do is we want to have sustainable development. Sustainable development in the new inclusive wealth world is that we keep growing this bound of capital and we don't deplete it. Now, the issue is, if we go ahead and look at this, shocks, what they do is they impact the capital. And so it's taking away from the ability of an economy to produce. And so it is very important to protect our capital. So here's an example, unfortunately, with my name, Cyclone Kenneth that just hit southern Africa. It damaged roads and bridges, which is that produced capital. And teams couldn't even reach the flood victims. But this is what the total economic damage to Mozambique alone was $1 billion, 8% of the total domestic product, the most extensive natural disaster. Most of that was destroying capital, bridges, farmlands, schools, homes. So next year, rather than building new capital, they were replacing the old capital, and it slows economic growth. And work we've done in Southern Africa, this is the biggest threat of climate change, is not drought, but floods, which destroys capital. And so the World Bank estimated for the 3 countries over $2 billion in damages. In our work looking at Uganda, what we found is that over the next 20 years, that enhanced investment in flood control could bring returns on the order of $10 billion. If we invest in flood control in 2 forms, mainly nature-based solutions of protection of wetlands, being careful how we develop, not to develop in floodplains, that we can bring a return of almost 10 to 1 on our investments in terms of flood protection, because what we're doing is protecting our capital. So as we move forward to this last theme of urban growth, we've had the privilege of working together with GIZ and the ministry and Dr. Calise and the steering committee to look at what was a project known as WASEP, the Water Security Action and Investment Plan for Uganda. And as we looked at that, one of the things we see here is that increased investment to a sustainable water secure future for Greater Kampala metropolitan area will lead to about 4.2 increase in GDP over the next 20 years. And that's $195 per capita by 2040. And as we look at that, part of that is not just going to stay in the capital region, but it's going to go throughout all of Uganda through the linkages of economy. So these investments in developing that further goes through all of these different sectors as we look at that. And so we talk about this and say, well, what is the importance of that? You know, is this investment good? Because as we've said, there is not enough capital for investments for doing all the projects that Uganda needs. So how do we prioritize? And I showed at the beginning, where was water in that priority list? Well, we want to show what is the scale of this investment. So if we look at returns of other important projects, the oil production projects during its initial phase is about 1.6% increase of GDP. At its peak, 7.2, in its last year, about 1. Climate change impacts are proposed to be about 1.5 to 2% impact. Malaria alone is about a -1. But if we look at investing in water secure Greater Kampala, we get on the order of 4% increase per year over the next 20 years. So investment in water security, investment in environmental protection is not a drag on the economy, slowing down growth and slowing down developing income, but what it is actually enhancing that. And as we've seen in Vietnam and many other places throughout the world, so Vietnam, we're looking back at data about what has happened. With our work, we're using a model of what could be in the future, and they're aligning together to say we need to worry about the environment as we move forward. So what are some of the big takeaway messages from the recent work that we've seen and from what other people are saying around the world? There was a very famous activity that took place in Stockholm. 13 of the world's leading economists, 4 former chief economists of the World Bank, and Nobel laureates were together. And they came out with some core principles, and it's called the Stockholm Statement. And they said, be careful, GDP growth is not an end in itself. Well, why it's important and it measures things, what we want to do is development has to be inclusive, including all and bringing up everyone. But number 3 addresses this point. They have said environmental sustainability is a requirement, not an option. And these are not people from the Ministry of Water and Environment. These are chief economists sitting in cabinet, in the prime minister level, looking at global development. So that number 3, and I emphasize not an option there. What else have they shared with us? They said, as NDP 3 says, we need a structure of change in countries. We have to have this transformational change because agriculture is low productivity in terms of wages. If we want to increase the welfare of the citizens of Uganda, to give them, drive them out of poverty, give them more resources, we have to move to things like industrialization. We have to move to higher productive services. But again, it has to be done sustainably and not at the cost of the environment. And then finally, as we've looked at this, all successful development has entailed government playing an important role. We all know PPP, public-private partnership, is crucial to development. But in terms of infrastructure and institutions, the government has to play a really important role to provide that infrastructure so that economic growth can come. Roads can't be built by individual firms. Roads have to be built by the government. Flood protection needs to be by the government. So the Ministry of Water and Environment is crucial in providing many of these physical infrastructures, but also the whole institutional infrastructure, providing the education to develop and be able to do things like smart economies and others to allow the country to grow. And then finally, one of the things we want to be careful at is Professor Joseph Stiglitz, who's a Nobel Prize laureate in economics and also was former chief economist of the World Bank, mentioned a few things, and he said, how do we measure performance and social growth? We want to be careful. And they said, impact on GDP may be misleading. We want to look at that because much of it can go to foreign owners and managers. And GDP does not include the value of resource depletion and environmental degradation. We've showed that we can do both. So we want to be careful, but just not to have a single measure. In many areas, adverse effects of environment and health can be very significant, as we've shown. GDP says nothing about sustainability or inclusiveness of growth. That's why some of these other metrics like inclusive wealth, which is related to the capital of human, natural, and productive, and the fact that we have to keep that growing to be sustainable. So what we said is you need to bear in mind what we measure affects what we do. If we measure the wrong thing, we'll do the wrong thing. So with that message in mind, we have to be careful as we move forward. And so the development challenge is great. But as I've worked over the last 15 years in Uganda, I see a great receptiveness to grow sustainably in Uganda. And if there are a few things that I think about as we look here, is we have to listen across disciplines. Engineers have to talk to agronomists, have to talk to energy specialists, to social scientists. We need all resources on hand. We have to make sure the limited resources we have are used productively and without waste. We need to collect more data. We need evidence-based decision-making, and that needs to be based first on data. We can build models, but our models are only as good as the data that we validate them to. So we have to keep measuring our environment and other actions. We need to use all the tools that are out there. There have been many tools developed locally in Uganda with development partners. We have to use them together, and we need to train our staff in the public sector and in the private sector to use these tools. And finally, we need to communicate our findings in language for decision making. Many of us in the room today are engineers or economists or others. We have to make our message to be understood by policymakers so we can be there. And as Professor Stiglitz says, we have to be careful because the metric we use matter as we go forward. The last thing I want to do is to leave you with a message, since most of us here are engineers, to bring something from economics, which I think is a valuable view as we look at this. Kenneth Boulding, a very famous economist in the United States, said, "If I'm going to live below a dam, I would much rather have it built by an engineer than an economist." So I think we can say amen to that. But nevertheless, the economist comes into the picture perhaps by asking the awkward question as to whether the dam should be built in the first place. So the issue is, there is a great need across all sectors in Uganda. We only have limited amounts of investment from domestic investment sources and from donors and from loans and other things. And the question is, where is it best used? Because there's a concept in economics that I think we all need to take with us all the time, and that's called the opportunity cost. We could spend some money and it would do well, but how much more might it get from an alternative use if we spent it on somewhere else? So I think all of us need to come and have dialogue across sectors: agriculture, water, transport, energy, education. Where is that dollar best spent? And even within our ministries, where is it spent, so that we can get the most for it because we have a limited resource? So finally, I thank you again for inviting me to be part of this. I cannot look forward enough until when I can be back and see you in person. I am happy to say that last week I got my second jab of Pfizer, so I'll be ready to come as soon as you'll let me there. I have 2 tickets that are still open to Kampala, which I hope to use soon. And I wish my blessing on this week that the dialogue that will go forward will be productive, and the ultimate goal will be inclusive development for the wonderful citizens of Uganda. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor. Are you still hearing from us? Hi, Professor.
Yes.
Thanks very much, and there has been a thunderous applause for you here in the room for your presentation. And thanks for drinking the Elgon, certainly Ugandan coffee, as well as eating from the rich ingredients in the Rolex. Though it was a little dark, in Uganda we don't make them dark, Professor. Well, we shall engage him as we move on. We are now preparing to go into the panel discussions, and as the panel comes up to the podium, Josephine and I will be inviting them one by one. We shall split the entire group into 2 so that we can have them in 2 different clusters. We will start with Miss Elsie Atafwa, the UNDP resident representative for Uganda.
So my job here is quite simple. As you make your way up, I will just speak a little about you. Ms. Elsie is the resident representative for Uganda UNDP. In this position, she leads and is accountable for harnessing and directing the full potential of UNDP's capabilities and associated partnerships in support of national development goals and strategies in Uganda. Prior to this, she led, managed, and coordinated UNDP's climate and forest team and office in Africa, provided overall strategic direction, policy, and technical guidance to 28 countries in the Africa portfolio.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's put our hands together for Elsie. She has already taken up her seat. The next panelist will be the Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Water and Environment, Alfred Okoto Kidi, represented by Dr. Florence Grace Adongo.
All right, and as Dr. Adongo takes her seat on the podium, a little bit of information about her. She's the Director, Water Resources Management. She's the Chair, Uganda Water and Environment Week. She served in the water fraternity for 30 years under various positions. She's the first female director in the history of water and environment. She's steered the launch of the Uganda Water and Environment Week 2018 and still carries on to support the team that is doing it now.
Thank you. Our next panelist will be Mr. Ramadan Gobi, a lecturer at Makerere University Business School.
Mr. Ramadan Gobi is an economist and policy analyst. He's a disciple of economics that works, and he teaches the same at Makerere University Business School. I think they were speaking about people like Mr. Ramadan Gobi when you are building a, was it a bridge? At Makerere University Business School, he heads a think tank, the MOVES Economic Forum. His research interests are in industrial policy, economic policy, and political economy. He is a regular pundit in media on economic issues and writes a weekly column, Are You Listening, Mr. President?, in the Sunrise newspaper. He has consulted with Overseas Development Institute, ODI, UK, International Labour Organization, International Monetary Fund, Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, Financial Sector Deepening Uganda, Government of Uganda, Action Coalition for Development and Environment, and many others. He is the director at the Uganda Development Corporation, the government's investment arm.
Thank you, Josephine, and let's clap for them. There are two ladies on the podium and one gentleman, and therefore the gentleman is disadvantaged, so we will change the order and start with him instead of the ladies first. Ramadan, away from the questions that I had, I need you to start us off by making a 1-minute rejoinder. Professor Strezpek talked about the GDP as being the main measure of economic growth and all that. And we know that now, better informed, the world over, many people are saying GDP might actually be misleading in terms of water safety, environment which is sustainable, conservation. What is now, in your view, supposed to be the best, solution to looking at this? How do we achieve sustainability minus only talking about walls and tarmac for, for GDP growth?
Thank you very much, Charles, and good evening to all the participants. Protocols observed. I'm glad that the professor swung this keynote to the direction which is quite more comfortable for us economists these days. We're encouraging the world to look at development sustainably in terms of not necessarily looking at what we are accumulating in numbers which are read to us by those with the powers to read the numbers, but also by looking at what exactly is pertaining to our lives. Joseph Stiglitz, the professor he has quoted, we teach him now religiously in development economics because he transformed the thinking at World Bank on how we measure development, because at one time it was pure about GDP, and the GDP is like a calculator which only adds and it doesn't have a function for subtraction. You are only adding whatever has been produced, the monetary value in a year, but without looking at what cost, that opportunity cost the concept he ended with. So there are, of course, alternatives which are being tried every day, and now that the UN brought us the Sustainable Development Goals, in there we have almost whatever it takes to look at alternative way of getting inclusive development. And in that, some have said, why don't we try gross national happiness? And we look at development more comprehensively, because you know the end result of every human being, why we wake up and work so hard or do whatever we do, we are searching for one major aspect, happiness. And this happiness, development economists have reduced it to three major aspects: the freedom to choose, the freedom of choice, self-esteem, and sustainable income. That word sustainability, sometimes we misunderstand it. It seems a bit complex, but in simple terms, it just asks us a question: whether in whatever we are doing to make ourselves happy, we are mindful of the future generation, that we must leave behind a stock of resources which is equivalent to what we inherited. So are we, when we are fishing in Lake Victoria, are we mindful that Lake Victoria must remain intact in the same way we inherited it for the future generation? That's the sustainability bit. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll pose my question to Ms. Elsie. As a UN agency, you support Uganda through many sectors, one of which is the water and environment sector. How critical are water and the environment resources in Uganda's socio-economic transformation?
Well, first, let me thank the Ministry for inviting the United Nations family to be on the panel, and I'm humbled to be here representing the team here, and the resident coordinator is here as well, and my colleague from FAO. Let me also say that this discussion is really timely for a number of reasons. First, when we're starting the rollout of the National Development Plan 3, and when we are also talking about the Sustainable Development Goals and the Decade of Action. In other words, there's a lot that we need to do within a short period of time. But it's also coming at a time that we are talking about post-COVID recovery and resilience building. And when we talk about building forward better, it is not only about building forward better, but also building forward greener. And this is very important, and this sets the tone for our conversation today. Now, to answer the question, the importance of water and environment to socioeconomic transformation, I want to situate it by looking at two parameters: the socio-economic transformation and the word security. That's very important. Now, when you look at Africa, and this, I'm going to tackle the first one first, the socio-economic transformation, the role of water and environment. In the case of Africa, and also Uganda in particular, our development is nature-based, and I think Professor Ken made my work easier by talking about that. What does it mean? It means that when we are seeking a development that will reduce poverty, when we are seeking a development that will create wealth, when we are seeking a development that says that leaving no one behind, we need to look at where does it come from. Now, you take the case of Uganda. Let's take the energy sector, for example. We get about 28% of our energy, electricity from hydro, which means, and I think if Karuma comes online, that's even more, which means that we need that energy for industrialization, and it comes from water. So you can already see the interconnection between water and energy and industrialization. You take the agriculture sector, for example, and my colleague Antonio is here, and he'll clearly tell you, you will need that water for irrigation, for example, and that's very important. 68 to 70% of our population here in Uganda are very much dependent on the agriculture sector. And therefore, you cannot talk about agriculture without talking about water. You cannot decouple the two. You talk about tourism, exactly the same thing. Environment and water is very much hinged. Tourism hinges on environment and water. If you take, for example, the places that we go to, our gorillas, they are in the forest. Our wetlands, the birds are there. So when somebody comes bird watching here, they come because of the wetlands. So you can already see that water and environment is not an add-on, as Professor Ken said. It is at the center of national development processes in the country. And I can go on and on. You also take the social services, for example, health becomes very important. When the minister in waiting talked about the fact that, during COVID times, we need water to wash our hands. We need water for drinking. We need water for so many things. You can already link that to health. So by and large, the development agenda of Uganda is very much dependent on that, and therefore the way we are going to utilize resources becomes very important if we link it back to leave no one behind, if we link it back to increases in income, if we link it back to the agenda of the 2040 that we are all supporting. Now, let me then shift to the word security, because I don't think the organizers just put the word security there. Why security? Why water and environment security? Why does it matter for a country like Uganda? Now, it's very important that as we develop, we look at the trade-offs. It is very important because you can't be industrializing, opening up new wetland areas, therefore destroying your wetland, which comes at a cost to the country, because then you're going to spend more money for water, generating water quantity and quality. So the trade-offs have to be managed. In other words, as we look at development hinged on water and environment, we also have to think, how secure would that be in the future? We cannot trade it off now by just doing things anyhow. We need to ensure that the pathway is green, the pathway is sustainable. So if you take pollution, for example, if we don't manage the industries properly and the way they manage waste, you can then generate waste that then goes into the river and the lakes, and the government spends thousands of dollars or millions of dollars trying to treat that waste. That is where the trade-off comes in. So just to conclude, in the interest of time, it is important for us to look into the importance of water and environment as part of the Sustainable Development Agenda, as part of NDP3 implementation, and therefore they would contribute both from the agriculture sector, the environment sector, the tourism sector, the transport sector, the fishery sector. It is very important, and we have to manage that relationship between nature and people as we move forward, because of the importance of securing that for the future of the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Elsie. To Dr. Grace Adongo, Uganda's economy is going to continue relying on the available stock of water, the environmental and natural resources to produce the needed goods and services. How has the Ministry of Water and Environment positioned itself to ensure that water and environmental security is assured for the country? Are we doing enough as the ministry, as government? Is what we have done so far adequate?
Okay, thank you very much, moderator. Just as said, and my previous speakers have said, water and environment is fundamental. And it's also recognized in the Vision 2040 for Uganda as an opportunity which can help to catalyze industrialization in Uganda. As a ministry, we have positioned ourselves in various ways. One of them is to ensure that government provides the appropriate enabling environment for sustainable development and management of the water resources. That is why we have a dedicated institution, Ministry of Water and Environment, to look at this pertinent issue. Secondly, we have also set up various institutions that enables us to monitor, regulate, and develop the water resources and the environment resources in an even and sustainable manner. The ministry has not only done that, we realize that most of the stakeholders in water and environment, that is the whole population of Uganda, are not aware of the importance water and environment has in social and economic development of Uganda. Most of the time, people take water and environment for granted. They think it is God-given, it is there, and I'm sure even they are doubting Thomases, because as I'm talking, you're looking at Lake Victoria. Now, if I say the water is not available, nobody will understand. So one of the key things is it caused us to rethink how we can implement management and development of water resources and environment in this country together with stakeholders. So it was very important that we launched the Uganda Water and Environment Week as a platform that brings stakeholders together to dialogue, to exchange knowledge and experience, to share findings from practitioners and experts so that we can build our capacity and have a positive mindset towards water and environment. We also realize that in most cases, water resources and environment is looked at as an environment issue, not a development issue. We are here to put to all stakeholders that management and development of water and environment is a development issue and must be put at the center. Just as we have heard today, the country depends on its stock of natural resources, and these natural resources are interconnected, and we need to know, and we are having increased demand for these water resources because the population is increasing and we want to transform the country into a middle-income country, so the demands for these natural resources are increasing. And yet we must make sure that we have proper management for the people right now and the future. So as a ministry, we are doing a lot of awareness campaigns, sensitization. We have established a Water Resource Institute to share case studies of best practices, do applied research, do dialogue, and train on what works. We have not only stopped there. We have a robust monitoring system which we are continuously upgrading to cope up with the technology so that we are able to monitor and forecast, understand water and environment, so that we can talk in terms of figures. We have not stopped there. We have now gone, we realize that maybe technical people, we scientists, have been talking among ourselves, and yet to negotiate for more resources, you must convince an economist. That's why, for me, I had to go for an MBA, and I had to go economics and business management, so that I can bring water resources views from economic and accounting terms, so that it can be appreciated. That's why you have seen Professor giving us quotations, because the ministry had to undertake studies on water and environment contribution to economic transformation of this country. So we are doing a number of things in the technical areas. Not only that, we have positioned ourselves to present Uganda's interest on transboundary water resources. You know that Uganda is both an upstream country to Kenya, Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi, and Congo, and it's a downstream, and it's also, these countries that have counted are upstream Uganda, but Uganda is also upstream other countries. So within the National Convention on Transboundary Water Resources, we are obliged to follow certain issues in order to develop shared water resources. We have built capacity, and we are very strong on matters of transboundary, and we have a number of projects in the country that are related to transboundary water management projects, including some of the hydropower transmission lines to South Sudan, to DR Congo, and others. And we have other projects with DR Congo in Leaf, Lake Victoria, Lake Edward, and Albert. We also have others with Kenya and Tanzania, joint programs. Uganda has also mobilized stakeholders. I don't know which particular stakeholder is not represented here. As a ministry, we think that all stakeholders should come at table to discuss matters that pertain to our lives. And in line with the national policy and the law, stakeholder involvement is very important, including the private sector, to see, even after you have taken the water, how are you using it? How are you sustainably using the wood, fuel wood? Are you having energy-saving stoves? Are you planting trees? There are many initiatives which culminated into our prevent activities to showcase of what the ministry is doing. We are trying as much as possible to lobby for support to ensure that we implement the resources and earn the benefits from the services of these natural resources in a more sustainable manner. So we have a long list, but above all, as a ministry, we must ensure that there is equitable access to all the benefits accruing from water and environment. And in that way, we both allocate, but we also regulate the usage, and we enforce the laws and measures that government has put in place, and also advise government on any emerging issues and how they should be handled.
I just wanted to, through a yes or no answer, you gave us a very good lineup and achievements of training, and you talked about capacity building. Directly under you, do you have some young ladies and gentlemen who are also following in your path and learning as much as you are doing for also sustainable capacity to be left within the ministry and government?
Yes, I do. Actually, my directorate is the largest directorate.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much,
Josephine.
Dr. Adongo. In keeping with time, we must rush through quite a bit of what we wanted to ask. You spoke very well about the dedication that the ministry has to water and environment management, but you also mentioned resource management, the resources. So we speak about funding, and I'm going to bring that question to the economist in the room. Over the years, we see that the funding that is allocated to this sector reduces. If the sector is indeed as important as the picture that has been painted for us, why is it not being allocated enough resources? And what should the Ministry of Water and Environment do to convince the government that this sector requires the attention that is due to it?
Thank you very much, Josephine. First of all, this sector of water and environment is inadequate in terms of prioritization, leave alone funding itself. The prioritization aspect is low. At least that's what we established when we studied the National Development Plan 2. And it's quite difficult to track water, environment, sanitation, and hygiene funding. There is a general lack of disaggregated data in a budget allocation as well as in statistics for waste and environment sector, particularly sub-sector, including data on grant transfers to local government or local governments. We also found that there is a lot of off-budget donor funding in this sector, although recently there has been effort to integrate some of this funding in the national budget, beginning especially financial year 2018-19, but we still have a very big challenge in the sector as far as the integration of funding in one basket is concerned. This undermines effective planning and budgeting, and it also gives sometimes a wrong overall picture of how the sector is being funded. During the NDP2 period, we found that nearly half of the approved budgets for water environment activities were not released. 49% of the resources budgeted for water, environment, and its major orphans, sanitation and hygiene. Those monies were budgeted but not released. Our analysis of these budgets found that the sector on average experienced an annual funding deficit of 518 billion Uganda shillings, an equivalent of about $140 million for only that period of 5 years. Now, there is no criteria which is quite objective in allocating funding to this sector compared to other sectors. And this is something which the sector needs to look at very seriously. Which criteria should we use when we are allocating budget for the sector? To To me, I think the following can help. First of all, beginning with the internal reorganization of the sector, we start with institutional issues of establishing a sound legal, institutional, and policy framework for the sector. It's lacking to coordinate this sector. The sector tends to be quite scattered between the Ministry of Water and Environment, our host today, but also the other MDAs, Ministry of Education, Ministry of Health, local governments. They have components of especially sanitation and hygiene that they handle. Yet there is no institutional or policy framework to coordinate them. There is, of course, usually when you talk to stakeholders, they talk of an MOU of 2001, but this is not legally binding, and we found it largely superfluous. Secondly, you need to consolidate the funding for this sector if it is going really to mobilize more funding. There's need to consolidate it such that we focus on a in a comprehensive way. We have a comprehensive approach to the water sanitation, hygiene, as well as environmental management. There is also need to create a separate budget line for the wash sector, especially that wash component, to address the issue of low prioritization of the especially sanitation and hygiene, which has led to very low funding for those aspects. We also need to disaggregate the MDA programs to separate the budgets for WASH and other MDA activities. We found a lot of, for example, in programs and sub-programs, we tend to put the monies together, and it is quite difficult to know the line which separates the money for WASH from the money of other activities of the core, especially the core activities of some of these MDAs. For example, when you go to Ministry of Education, it becomes very difficult to trace the money for sanitation and the hygiene from their budget lines. I'm now talking of other MDAs particularly, other than water and the environment, which is the mother of this particular activity. So most of the initiatives, Josephine, in this sector are not linked with the clear financing mechanisms. And we thought that if the sector is to really get more funding, it needs first internal reorientation to make the sector more integrated and coordinated. And then after that, there is need to work out on the, for example, effective communication of what the contribution of the sector is to the economy. Because it seems the people who sit in budgeting rooms, they usually get more obsessed with the observables. You know, observables are easy to budget for. A road, a dam. But when you say environment, and if somebody sees 500 billion for environmental management, it's like, what is this for? Because environment seems to be quite abstract. I will stop there.
Thank you very much. And I think that's the reason why we have these kinds of gatherings. If only they get to watch them and understand why exactly water and environment are important. Charles?
Thank you, Josephine. Ms. Elsie, we are talking inclusive development and sustainability across the country. Uganda has recently, especially last year, created by law a number of urban new cities, actually, several of them. What, in your view, do you think that needs to be done to ensure that these new cities also take up the issue of water and environment security so that it is all inclusive across the country?
Thank you very much. If I may just say one or 2 points in addition to what the professor said on the finance before I come to your point, because it's a very important point that he makes. I think we need to also look at innovative financing, which we haven't tapped into mostly, including areas such as payment for ecosystem services. We have private sector here that are using a lot of water, yet maybe they're not really paying for what they are actually using. And how can we engage them strategically in terms of catchment areas, supporting communities and things like that, I think becomes very key. But beyond financing, it's very important that we look at policy shifts. It's very important because you do have situations where, for example, you take hospitals that are still using biomass, yet they can use electricity because we are producing excess electricity. How do you then give them tariffs that allows them to do, things differently? So what I'm saying is that funding is important, but also we need to go beyond that to look at how is the sectors, agriculture, mining, and others, mainstreaming issues around environment and water into their processes, value chains, and things without, making sure that they do things right beyond corporate social responsibility. So, Professor, I just thought I would add to that. Now, coming back to the question around cities that are opening up, I think, yes, the government's prerogative to open up new cities. I think there's a couple of things that we need to encourage and would like to encourage from the UN point of view. One of them is on smart planning. It's going to be important how planning is done and how planning is done in an integrated manner. In other words, you don't want to just to see agriculture planning for agriculture, forestry planning for forestry, mining planning for mining, but then how do you bring all the actors together in a seamless way to make sure that one thing doesn't impact on the other? So I think planning becomes very important from the point of view of natural resource governance. And this is where you have to bring in different stakeholders, private sector, you have to bring in, local communities, traditional leaders in that space. So I think that is very, very important. The other thing I think would be very important is really looking at incentive mechanisms. I like to focus on this a bit more because sometimes when we want to go at scale, within municipalities, within communities, it becomes very important what kind of incentives do you give. So for example, you would see that in some countries there's a lot of focus on fiscal instruments, which is an incentive for cities to do things differently. I think there's one, I don't know whether it's an African country or in Asia, where if a municipality grows more trees, they actually get more from the government budget as a result of that. Now, how are we going to look at planning cities in a new way where you can incentivize these cities to do things very, very differently? So that's another way. The other thing that I think would be quite important to do is in terms of the kind of investments that we put into these places. Investment can take different forms, and I think, again, a reflection on that will be very important as we create these new cities. You just don't want them to be there. You want to make sure that the investments are there from all angles to make sure that they can operate at the level that they do. Then, of course, I think one thing that COVID has taught us is how we optimize innovation and digitalization. I think that's going to be key. Professor Ken, I think, alluded to that. Now, there are different ways of looking at it. I think recently we, together, the United Nations family with the National Forest Authority, we have just developed, a deforestation visualization platform that in real time, you're seeing what is happening to your city. Now, that can inform decision making, that can inform investment and what type of investment that should be made. So again, digitalization, innovation, innovative approaches becomes very important conversation with the cities. And in that regard, I think we want to encourage a lot of South-to-South cooperation, which is part of the policy support and knowledge brokering role that the United Nations brings. Now, how do you twin cities, whether within Uganda or within the Africa region, or within, with other regions in Latin America and Asia to make sure that they do things differently? Recently, we've done quite some good work in Karamoja, 20 Karamoja, with other cities to see how best they can draw lessons and vice versa so that we can learn from that process. So by and large, I mean, there's a lot that has to be done. I just want to sum up by saying that we will need to invest, we will need to provide incentives, we will need to look at integrated approach to development because it can't be done alone, and we have to look at issues such as digitalization. On our part, as a United Nations family, I mean, the cooperation framework that was recently signed by the resident coordinator and His Excellency the President provides us a great instrument to use to look at new ways of doing business when it comes to cities and smart cities. And we are very much committed in providing policy support, programmatic support, and other support, including at the local government level, to address some of these issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elsie. I'm going to turn to you, Dr. Adongo, and this will be my last question to you to keep with time. Professor Ken spoke to shocks, and I'm going to look at the water and environment. Had quite a number of shocks from there in this past year. How is your sector responding to the current challenges caused by COVID-19, and then also the rising water levels, flooding, job loss, and so on? What should the country do to put an end to these shocks or effectively adapt?
Thank you very much, moderator. Yes, in the past few years, the country has been experiencing rising water level, which has resulted into floods in many parts of the country. The background to this rising water level is linked to environmental degradation, which is also linked to population increase and increasing demand for natural resources. Now, the Minister of Water and Environment, as the custodian of these resources, has had to undertake a number of activities, some of which we have already been taking, because part of the management of water resources and its development requires you also to manage the risk that is involved within the resources. So one of the things we have had to do, and we have been doing over time, is to ensure that we have a robust monitoring, forecasting, and early warning systems. That's why it was possible for Uganda National Meteorological Authority to give alerts and warnings about the unpredictable and unusual weather events. Unfortunately, it has been going on for the last 1 or so years. We are not having proper dry spells. So as a ministry, we have to make sure that we inform and communicate, alert and warn. But we are also leading a national task team which is in charge of management of these floods, which brings in various institutions. And we come out with a national strategic plan for management of these floods. In terms of jobs, you may wish to know that the international community assessed the importance of water resources specifically and found out that 3/4 of the jobs in the world are directly or indirectly dependent on water and environment resources. And therefore, it might not be easy for you to say this job was created by Minister of Water and Environment. You need to look at the benefits accruing from water resources, from the environment, and how they are being used to provide services to different sectors and the community in the country. In my earlier remarks, I also told you that the water and environment has come out, standing out as a key preventive contributor to COVID-19. So these are very key important areas. While some jobs could have been lost, those that have been given support, access to water and environment resources have continued. Actually, that is why you also saw that some of the jobs that were resilient were linked to water and environment. So I think that is our contribution. In terms of the rising water level, it is still continuing. It has not stopped. And we are expecting the long rainy season to have another important, another perhaps not very impressive event. But what the Ministry of Water and Environment has done is to demarcate all the high-risk areas, and have asked those who are living in those high-risk zones or who have been vested to stay or move to higher grounds where there is safety. We have continued to provide safe water and sanitation, improved sanitation, and provide essential facilities that can enable us to fight COVID and other water-related diseases or environment-related diseases. The ministry is also undertaking enforcement and restoration. That's why this morning there was a launch for tree planting, because the key issue is that the natural infrastructure that used to retain, keep water, maintain the cycle has been destroyed. This morning, you heard from the chief guest that 50% of the forest cover, which used to retain water and keep water and protect the environment from erosion, have been degraded. And now we are having a big challenge. So we are trying to do restoration, enforcement, regulate the water use. It is the Minister of Water and Environment that determines how much ESCOM in Jinja, any hydropower in this country, must release at any specific time. So we are doing monitoring, 24-hour monitoring, and ensuring that we use it to check that the water is released properly, but also check for compliance. We are also constructing infrastructure for water storage, so that in times of drought or in times of scarcity, we have storage. I must say that we are still not doing well in terms of that infrastructure because of the limited resources. But that is very fundamental if we have to be resilient in the fluctuations of the weather and climate change impacts. We also have we are also having, like, the Water Resource Institute that we have established. We have Applied Technology Center that helps us to acquaint the water and environment users with the possible technologies that can be used to enhance their resilience, cope with the increasing demand, and reduce use. We are also linked with the private sector, both in development of water resources for various uses, but we are also doing what is called water stewardship program. And we are having this to manage water based on a catchment. This catchment enables us to protect the water resources so that the business people can have their business sustainably managed.
Thank you very much, Dr. Adongo. I know that you have quite a bit that you're doing, but we really need to move to the next question and the next panel. So I'll allow you to say one of the other things that you're doing.
The last one, which I was saying, is that we have moved to especially the industrial sector, the small, medium, and micro enterprises, looking at how to optimize the water that you use so that you increase productivity and maximize your profit and reduce the waste pollution that is happening in the environment. And this one, we are doing it collaboratively, and the private sector is indirectly making input into the sector to manage the water resources in the catchment, but also reduce on pollution and maximize their profit. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Adongo. Ladies and gentlemen, let's put our hands to clap for the three. And may I request them to resume their seats. We are going to invite the second cluster of panelists, and we shall have a similar approach to tickling the questions, and then they respond. We are going to start with Honorable Mariam Mayanja Kalubo, Minister of Lands and Environment in the Buganda Kingdom.
Honorable Mariam is an accountant by profession. From 2005 to 2013, she was the State Minister for Gender and Community Development. 2013 to 2015, State Minister for Community Development, Bulungi Wansi, and in charge of Royal Travels. Minister of Gender, Community Development, and in charge of Royal Travels, again from 2015 to 2019. And 2019 to date, she's the Minister for Lands, Agriculture, Cooperatives, Environment, and Community Development, Bulungi Wansi.
Thank you very much. Honorable Mariam has already taken up her seat. The next panelist is going to be Professor Alex Ariho, the Director General, Excel Hort Consult Agribusiness Incubator.
Professor Alex Ariho is Chief Executive Officer of African Agribusiness Incubators Network and Director General of Excel Hort Consult Agribusiness Incubator. It has headquarters in Ghana, operates in 55 African Union member countries. Alex is an active visiting professor in several universities globally, including American Heritage University of Southern California in USA, Cape Coast University in Ghana, Sokoine University of Agriculture, Kabale University, and Uganda University in Uganda.
Thank you very much. Professor has already taken up his seat as well. Finally, but not of the least importance, we have Ms. Bleak Carol Gloria, National Coordinator, Youth Go Green.
Ms. Bleak Carol Gloria is an active member of Youth Go Green Uganda. She represented the Ugandan youth at a Greener Africa Youth and Climate Change Dialogue that was held in the margins of the 2019 African Union Summit in the Republic of Niger. Carol obtained a Bachelor of Science in Environment and Natural Resources Management, a qualification that enhanced her knowledge of environment management.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's clap for the ladies and gentlemen on the podium, and we are going to take 30 minutes just like we did with the first panel, and we shall ask them questions to which we shall expect you to answer very concisely so that we can have as more questions put to you as possible. Let me start with the youngest on the panel. And the most common complaint of the young people, this country, over 70%, close to 80%, youth-based, but then there is this big animal called unemployment. What role do you think water and environment resources can play in addressing the problem of unemployment?
Thank you so much. Well, to start with, natural resources play a very important role in ecosystem services. They provide us with a lot of services that create employment to us. Some of these are wetlands. We can go fishing, we can go harvest a few of these resources like the thatching materials, the clay, the bricks, provided we do it sustainably. We can do that. So we can have nature-based solutions. These are indirect benefits from the environment resources. Conservation activities such as reforestation, tree nurseries, advocacy, and capacity building campaigns about these resources. Some of these resources are at the verge of destruction. Swamp reclamation for infrastructure development, if they take on the role to restore the damages through advocacy on SDG 13 and SDG interconnection, with environment being the foundation. So the youth can engage in different activities to restore the damaged environment. And among these, we can plant trees, we can restore the damaged forests. Then we as Youth Go Green can engage in different activities since we are a youth-led organized group. We've so far carried out a few activities, and I will mention a few that we intend to do. We have waste recycling for charcoal briquettes, charcoal briquette production. This is an alternative to forests. So other than increasing pressure on the already decreasing number of trees or forest count, we can resort to briquette making as youth, and we can sell them. It's a booming industry as per now. Then we have plastic recycling. They've already mentioned that plastics are quite a big challenge in our environment. So once we engage in recycling these or collecting them or making bricks out of them, making pavers out of them, these are all ventures that we can carry on as youth. The establishment of regional tree nursery beds to raise 10 million tree seedlings. So these are greening skills and training and entrepreneurship that the youth can engage in to see that we restore the environment. So this is on the other part of restoring the environment that we can engage in. However, we can also tap into the opportunities that the environment or the resources in the environment give back to us. Because Uganda largely depends on the environment stock of resources for development. So we can participate in agriculture, like I have my own forest. I looked at my transcript and thought to myself, okay, of all these course units, about 35, which one can I concentrate in and make a living out of it? And given the fact that I had land as a resource, well, I went back to the village and planted a forest. That's one thing the youth out there can do to make a living out of it. Then the new technologies such as irrigation. We've mentioned agriculture of late is facing a challenge because the environment is being challenged. The climate is changing day and night. When we receive rainfall, we have it in a terrible amount than we need it. When we don't have it, we literally have prolonged droughts. So if the youth can venture into these, like new technologies, we can practice irrigation. If Egypt, that taps from the source of the Nile, back there at their home, they can tap and do agriculture throughout the year, why not the youth to venture into these technologies, spread them all over, and then we can have agriculture being practiced all year round. We have beekeeping. Okay. Let me just read them through. We have beekeeping, we have apiculture, we have value addition, we have innovation around green energy, like eco-stoves, green jobs, and biotechnology and genetic engineering. We have making papers from plastics, forestry, partnerships, and partnerships with these organizations, and volunteering, like I can volunteer with Youth Go Green. And this exposes me. It gives me the opportunity to meet probably potential employers. I am learning new things. I am learning new skills. Otherwise, how are we going to increase on our knowledge base and be competent out there when we do not know or expose ourselves to know? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Caro. I'm going to pose my question to Professor Alex. We've just heard from a youth, and I'm curious to know what lessons Uganda can learn from other countries related to establishing job incubation hubs around natural resources as key pillars for economic transformation and development.
Thanks so much, Josephine, and the participants. First of all is to start by appreciating the Ministry for the invitation and this opportunity to share today. I will straight away respond to your question, but I will start with where Carol ended from. And I will start by recognizing one of my mentors in-house here that I met this afternoon. And one of the things that I appreciate when I met him 15 years back was the kind of opportunity to allow the youth to interface with us or interface with them when they were advancing big concepts of landscape management, talking about agroforestry, and it was very hard for us to appreciate. But he made, or they made as an institution, an opportunity for the youth to interface with these seniors experts. And I want to recognize David Dury, in-house from David. So as a starting point, one of the big lessons you did mention, I sit in Ghana, I work with about 55 African countries, but member states of African Union, as a technical arm of African Union. But the important part now that we are actually doing is profiling the mentors and the experts that can interface with the young population. When we talk about conservation, when we talk about natural resources, the best way to ensure sustainable economic transformation is to make sure that the young people are at the driving seat. So that's one point, number one, that I would like us to take forward. Two, Professor Kane did mention about the demands post-industrial revolution. We are talking about technologies, we are talking about innovations, but it is important for us to see what other countries are doing to match and move at the speed. And one of the things is what we call skill and talent development. We must come up with new skill sets that will allow the new actors in space to participate. You may talk about technology, but at the end of the day, how prepared are we? So it is important that we match what is it that is happening outside. Another aspect that is important, and which already I'm happy that we are discussing with the ministry and we're in advanced stages, is coming up with what you call water and environmental resources business incubation. It is important to think about investing in the sector, but investing in enterprises that are not going to survive, that are not sustainable, is a wastage of resources. So E plus R is equal to O. The events that are happening today, the responses that we are going to take today in this discussion is as equal to the output that we are going to get tomorrow. So sustainability is based on that. It is E plus R is equal to O. So as a lesson, let's not talk about increased investment if the results are going to change. And we are the ones to make the results change because we need to respond differently. And if I pick one example, since you talked about lessons outside and within, a country like Ghana now, 5 years back, they started a program, what they call One District, One Factory. Supported by World Bank, they designed a program that is taking into consideration water and environmental management, but they had to take stock what kind of jobs, employment, and wealth you're going to create along the entire program. Now, there are factories based at the district level. And now, 2 years back, after the lessons of 3 years, they upgraded the program and started now one incubator, one factory. Each factory is supposed to create a system of incubating the startups and SMEs that are emerging. And that is very fundamental. If we are talking about how do you create sustainability, sustainability does not come in air. We must invest, we must plan systematically, underline the skills, the skill set with the emerging opportunities. And when you talk about resources, what are we talking about? So it is important that we match that, and I think these are some of the lessons that we can pick from the rest of the world.
Thank you, Professor. Coming to Honorable Mariam Mayanja from the great Buganda Kingdom. I want to relate the question coming to you from the presentation of Professor Ken. He said we have to listen across disciplines and we must communicate and involve everybody to ensure that water and environmental security can lead to socio-economic transformation of Uganda. One question, but with two limbs, Madam Minister. Do you think that government is doing enough to involve cultural institutions? If yes, tell us one or two examples. If no, tell us what needs to be done better or more by government to involve organizations or institutions such as yours. And there are many across the country. But the second limb of that question is, what do you think that kingdoms like Buganda can play to ensure that water and environmental resources can contribute more effectively in order for the country to realize some of these aspirations the House is discussing? Thank you.
Thank you very much, moderator. Fellow participants, let me first thank you for inviting us as a kingdom, and most especially inviting me as the Minister in charge of Environment and Water. As moderator said, I actually come from the great kingdom. We really cherish the kingdom and we are proud of it. Most of you here, you must agree with me that this kingdom is, I think, is the longest. It has been in existence since 900 years ago. It started with Sekabaka Chintu, and there came a time when development was required in the kingdom, and the Kabaka called, I've forgotten the name, I remember it, started this spirit of Bulungi Bwansi. And Bulungi Bwansi, it is the spirit which catered for development, and that's why Buganda developed and the rest of Uganda. I must answer these questions, I think, simultaneously, but let me start with the first one, which you asked me about the contribution of the government. I must say yes or no. Yes, when you look at Buganda Kingdom, when our tombs in Kasubi were burnt, the government came in and contributed something. So there we can say as a kingdom, the government helped the kingdom. There are so many programs which we do in the kingdom, and we do these programs together with the government, the central government, especially programs concerning health. A lot of immunization, HIV, fistula, you've had the Kabaka's run, but most of those programs we also do them with the central government. So there I must say the government is helping us, but on the other hand, there are so many other things which the kingdom is demanding from the government. When we look at the topic we are discussing right now, for us as a kingdom, and you very well know it is a cultural institution relying on cultural norms, and our culture depends on the environment. Our culture, I must repeat it, depends on the environment. And we see the government is not doing enough to protect the environment. And yet for us in the kingdom, we cherish and we want to conserve, preserve, and promote the environment. As I said, when you go to Blank, you can see that Royal Mile. Now we have started putting there our totems. Each one of us in Uganda has a totem, and those are our natural resources. But when you look at the data or the figures which we get from the Wildlife Authority, they are alarming. Those animals are disappearing. So it is our concern as a kingdom to see to it that those totems of ours, the natural resources, are well protected. And we see the laws are not being implemented. The laws are there, but they are not being implemented. When it comes to the protection, today in the morning I was at Lake Victoria. We are carrying out a Bulungi Once program regarding this floppy boat which was brought yesterday. And we saw people encroaching on the lake. They have built structures and they are not abiding with the law, which requires 200 meters away from the shores of the lake. So we can see that the government is not doing enough. I think I must stop there with that question. On the second question, you asked the role played by the kingdom. The kingdom is playing a lot regarding water and the environment. We carry out several programs, and one of them is that one which I mentioned, Bulungi Wansi. And it is an annual event, a weekly program, and our Kabaka, our dearest Kabaka, comes out of his palace, goes to his subjects, to the community, rally them to protect and have safe and clean water. That is one of his main reasons or objectives of that once a week. And he encourages them to work so that they can earn a smaller income. But most important, with safe water, people are encouraged to harvest rainwater. People are encouraged to, if you have enough money, you can buy these tanks. But as a kingdom, we have lobbied some partners which are helping us in this program of clean water and safe water, like Habitat for Humanity, which buy a 500-liter tank, and we build a decent house for someone who is really in total need of a house. And we make sure that house has a better latrine, clean water, as I said, and it is environmental friendly. We also have other partners like Wells of Life. They wells in Busuju and Singo. And these are friends from America. They have really done a tremendous job for the kingdom. We are lobbying for more. We are lobbying from the ministry. We have the structures. We have the people who are in need. And we have committed leaders in the kingdom.
Honorable, I'll just allow you one more remark. I'll just allow you one more remark, and then we'll move on to the next question. You had finished?
One more answer from you.
Oh.
So that we can go to the next set of questions.
I was going to elaborate on the kingdom structure, and that's the strongest, one of our strongest weapon we use. Because we have our king, we have the Katikiro, we have the Nabagereka, we have ministers like me, we have the county chiefs, the Saza chiefs, we have the Gombala chiefs, we have Miruka, we have the Batongoli, up to the grassroots. So for us in the kingdom, it's not very difficult to mobilize. So we have that skill also of mobilizing the community through our Kabaka, and once the Kabaka says something, it is an order. And the people love, and they really love the Kabaka and all those leaders, the topmost leaders of ours.
Thank you very much, Honorable, for sharing that with us. I'm going to turn to you, Professor Alex, for your closing remarks. Just to pick from the 55 countries that you operate in, maybe you have some thoughts to share with us. What are the challenges that we need to overcome so that water and environment resources make a significant contribution to socio-economic growth? Very quickly as you can, we've run out of time.
Thank you so much. I think right away from the previous panel, the discussion, and when you read even the expectations of the viewers, the participants, I think the biggest challenge is that there are a lot of opportunities, a lot of potential enterprises around water and environment. But we give them LEAP financing mechanism. And this is not only happening in Uganda, it is across in Africa. We don't give substantive, sustainable financing mechanism that is sustainable to make these businesses grow. So to me, the challenge number one is breaking through the financing mechanism of the emerging startups and SMEs that are going to invest and support the growth of the economy, the transformation of the economy, without compromising the natural resources. The challenge number two is uncoordinated policies, regulations, and frameworks across the region. You may be talking about industrialization now, but how are we making sure that the Minister of Trade that is engaging the businesses, that is engaging the private sector, the policies are harmonized to make sure that the private sector, while they are developing their businesses, they are taking into consideration water and environmental resources. So harmonization is important. We are now talking, how is the East Africa Community Industrialization Strategy harmonized to take advantage of the emerging opportunities? For example, we need to ask ourselves, if we talk about today, we are talking about free trade area. How are our SMEs and startups within water and environmental resources prepared to take advantage of the free trade area? You may give people passports to move, but they keep the passports home because they are going nowhere. There are two things you can trade. You trade the product or your brain. Two things. So there is no shortcut. We need to know that satisfaction comes from a word with the last six letters actually is action. So if we expect to be satisfied, we need to act, and that's action. The last one is about the incentivization policy. How are we incentivizing the private sector, the people that are investing? Even in this room, where are the banks? People who are banking the money that are coming from the ecosystem of water and environmental resources, the majority may not be here. So we need to create a mechanism, a specific platform that also brings the people that are actually also investing in water, and also those who are emerging. They are not yet there, But in terms of sustainability, we prepare them. And lastly, when you put all these things together, I think as a country, we need to move step 4. There's something being done very good with the ministry to do with water for production, to do with water for sanitation, to do with water for development. But I think it's high time for the country to move a step of water for business development.
Thank you, Professor. Finally, Carol, in 30 seconds, I just want you to give some thoughts from the youth desk. In your view, what policy measures do you think need to be put in place to harness the contribution of the youth in sustainable development and management of water and environment resources? In 30 seconds.
Thank you. Like we all know, the youth own the future, or they have a higher stake in the future. So we need to revise the Uganda Investment Code to strictly observe green investment. We love our wetlands, we love our forests, so let them be preserved, let the laws be enacted and implemented. They are enacted, yes, but let them be implemented. Like the Climate Change Bill has inclusion of all and decentralizing powers. Let it be enacted. Then we have sustainable use of environment resources and the SDGs and other policies. They also need to be observed. Then strictly implementing the polluter pays principle. This is a principle we have. It's a policy, but then you find out that many industries pollute and nothing is done to them. Then the precautionary principle should also be observed when they are assigning the EIS. Well, they have very good information about the measures that they're going to do afterwards. But after the project is certified, they divert to other things. So these are policies that we want to see being implemented.
Thank you very much, Carol. Ladies and gentlemen, let's clap for Professor, for Honorable Mayanja, for Carol, for their presentation and participation and sharing with us and the country and indeed the world their knowledge. Thank you very much. Over to Josephine.
All right, so we've come to the end of the event, but as we close, we invite you to join the ministry and partners all week for discussions during the Uganda Water and Environment Week. The conversations will be online, and there'll also be conversations on social media. You can follow the hashtag. Tomorrow there'll be a dialogue on valuing water and environment, resources for socio-economic transformation of Uganda, and it will be online, so you can join that as well. I'd like to invite Dr. Callist to wrap up the conversation.
Ladies and gentlemen, join me to first of all thank the keynote speaker and the panelists. Let's give them a big clap. Join me also to thank our wonderful moderators, Josephine and Charles. They will be with us on Friday. Let's give them a clap. They have done a fantastic job. Thank you very much. So on Friday, we'll be closing this session, the Water and Environment Week, but we still have a lot to cover during the week. As has been mentioned, we have dialogues for 4 days. Tomorrow we shall be having a dialogue on valuing water and environment resources from 10 to 1 p.m. in the morning by Zoom. On Tuesday we shall be having water and environment in a creative economy from 10 to 1. On Wednesday we shall be looking at managing water and environment shocks the same time. And then on Thursday we shall be dealing with water and environment security for smart urban growth. So a whole package, but we also have quite a number of events. We have parallel sessions, 5 parallel sessions every day in the afternoon from 2 to 5. We have Zoom links that are being shared, but please join in any of these events, side events, trainings, field visits, technical sessions. We have a very, very big menu, and we want to invite you to join us. But I want to thank you for sparing your time to come and be with us at this opening session. We want to wish you well during this week, and we thank God that has made this happen. Thank you very much. Before we leave, we have some refreshments out there to celebrate the opening of the 4th Uganda Water and Environment Week. We see you again in the course of the week. Thank you very much.
Kwata essimu! Kwata essimu! For the first time in Uganda.